Hi everyone, it's me Ardenly, and today's video is an answer to a question from one of the members of the Repatterning Parlor who poses the following scenario. They said, how do you deal with feelings of guilt for damage you caused after you made some mistakes in response to someone who caused harm for you? How do you discern between those real feelings of guilt versus someone who is just trying to use you as a scapegoat in the situation? So what I read from this question, they acknowledged it was a little vague. What I read from this question is there is a trend, there is a tendency for people who cause harm to deflect the focus from the harm that they've caused back onto the person who has experienced the harm by refocusing on the person they've harmed, the behavior of the person they've harmed in response to the harm and what damage they might have caused from that traumatized space. And how do you tell, is this real or am I being gaslit, right? Did I actually do some damage here, and should I feel some guilt for this? Or is this person just trying to focus the blame on me in order to deflect the blame from themselves? Are they just trying to use me as a scapegoat, right? That's what I get from this question. And nothing is black and white. So, the invitation here is, naturally, this is going to depend on the individual circumstances. There are some times that, very rarely, perhaps, that things will be all to one side or the other, right? Where the person is completely blameless and just being gaslit for things that they didn't actually do, versus where there actually has been harm caused and maybe the person is more to blame for that harm that happened than they want to admit to themselves. But it's rare that it's ever going to be a binary, right? Because usually when harm happens, when trauma happens, it's one of those sort of perpetuating cycles. It's one of those sort of things where trauma is caused in one way, and then that traumatized person also then continues to act out in another way from that space of wounding, right? That doesn't mean that it was their fault for being harmed. It doesn't mean that their body isn't necessarily doing exactly what it's designed to do under traumatized circumstances. However, we're all accountable for our behavior, ultimately, right? We're all responsible for our own behavior, which is precisely why we are responsible for walking that path toward the ability to set better boundaries and to do our due diligence to reduce harm in our communities, and also to reduce the harm that that is happening to us by being more and more and more in our embodied knowledge of where our boundaries are and what is acceptable and not acceptable. None of that can ever completely prevent harm from happening to us in our lives. But I do believe it is our responsibility to do as much as we can to be accountable for that which is under our control, right? So the first thing I would do in a circumstance like this is I would source out a third party that I trusted, who has my best interests at heart. And when I say who has my best interests at heart, I don't mean someone who's just going to tell me what I want to hear, who cares about me to the extent that they are likely to take my side regardless of what is presented. What I mean when I say someone who has my best interest at heart is I mean finding someone that I really trust to hold me to my highest good, to hold me to my absolute best way of showing up in the world. I tend to hang out with some amazing women who are all about accountability. Speaking of accountability, there's a wonderful book called Disrupting the Bystander that came out just recently, just a couple days ago, maybe a couple weeks ago if you're now watching this video, because it'll probably be a little bit into the future from when I'm recording it, by Anais Flocks. I believe she is listed as A.V. Flocks, goes by her first and second initials, as her author name. And I thought of this because she's one of the people that I really trust, given her background in accountability and harm reduction, and given her belief that accountability is not a punishment but a radical form of love, because it helps people to rise up and be better and to step into their better and better selves. So I call on people like that to really show me kindly and compassionately where I might be missing a piece of the equation that I could do better on. So I would source someone that you trust to be able to do that for you. Especially if you are a member of the Repatterning Parlor, that is a great place to find like-minded individuals to help you to move through the processing of the understanding of these situations so that you can really see them as clearly as possible, and to take responsibility where that is helpful and productive and helps you to make a positive change going forward, and also to not take blame where it's not helpful, where actually, you know, there are other factors that need to be seen and heard and acknowledged for the truth of the situation to come to the forefront. So finding that third party and ultimately being able, with support, to go through the story piece by piece and say, what is my responsibility? Where could I have done better? Where could I have set better boundaries in the first place so that perhaps I can avoid getting into this kind of situation? Again, it's never a guarantee. We can't control the behavior of the rest of the 8 billion people on the planet, and there will be plenty of things that happen to us that are not our fault for attracting whatsoever. But sometimes there are places where we let things slide, or we allowed things to get bad, and we didn't set a boundary where we could have, or we didn't call back our energy where we could have. So we want to look at that. And then we want to look at, okay, harm happened to me. Did I deal with it in the most productive way as possible? Did I respond to this situation in a way that I would want my future self to respond to? Or is there room for me to deal with this from a better, more grounded place where I'm not as much in a trauma response or in a trigger as I was this past time? Can I forgive myself for being in that trauma response because I didn't know better at the time, or I didn't set those boundaries at the time? Can I show myself compassion for why that may have happened, while also seeing where there is room for me to improve and be better? Guilt is only a useful emotion if it helps point us in the right direction. I'm going to say that again. Guilt is only a useful emotion if it helps to point us in the right direction. If we're feeling guilt over something, how do we release it? We release it by committing to being better. We release it by saying, okay, thank you for that information. Here's what thank you, guilt. Thank you for giving me this information, of giving me an emotional code that shows me a part of my shadow that I'm actually uncomfortable with. And given that I have that knowledge now, here's what I'm going to do better in the future. This is the version of myself that I'm committing to stepping up into. It's very rarely going to be just one or the other, you guys. It's very rarely going to be, I just have all this guilt from messing up the situation versus I'm completely blameless and this person is trying to use me as a scapegoat. It is usually going to be somewhere in the gray area. That person probably is going to be using you as a scapegoat in order to deflect the blame from themselves, but it's not your responsibility to entertain that dynamic when it feels shamey and deflective. It is your responsibility to look at it on your own time with someone who actually cares about you and loves you and wants you to be in your highest and best, whom you trust to help you discern the situation. If you're not trusting whether this person over here who feels really gaslighty and blamey is actually telling you the truth versus just deflecting, then source your discernment from someone whose judgment you do trust. It's probably going to be a little of column A and a little of column B. And with every situation, I believe there are always opportunities for us to examine what we were unconscious of and where we could show up better. I still deal with those all the time myself. I hope this was helpful. I'll see you next time.